Welcome to WitchLit, a podcast where we talk about the craft of writing and writing the craft. I'm your host, Victoria Raschke, fiction author, witch, and nosy Scorpio. Dodie Graham McKay is a writer, initiated witch, and filmmaker. She is inspired to document and share stories that capture the beauty of nature and the visible and invisible realms of magic and witchcraft. Her documentary films include The Winnipegans and Starry Nights. She was the Canadian correspondent for The Wild Hunt and facilitates A Busy Coven. She lives in Treaty 1 territory, homeland of the Métis Nation, Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. Dodie, welcome.
Hi there.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Great. Well, we'll jump right in then. And so my first question for everybody is, why write?
You know, sometimes you just have stuff to say and you got to get it out in a constructive way. And, my first sort of vice when it came to creativity was filmmaking. But that's not always practical. And the opportunity to write and become a better writer was presented to me through a series of crazy events. And I think I'd be crazy to walk away from those signs and symbols, So, being creative is a wonderful joy, and finding ways to do that is, it's just fun.
I mean, we would always hope the things that we love are fun. I know sometimes writing can be its own strange little torture, but ultimately it should be fun. So,
writing is fun. Finding the space and time is torture. Absolute miserable torture.
Agreed. So what was your writing journey like? Did it come out of documentary filmmaking, or was it kind of a separate event that kicked off writing for you?
Well, it was something that sprang out of filmmaking. Back in 2012, I released a short film, a documentary film called The Winnipegans that you mentioned. And the pagan world is so transparent. There's one degree of separation from everybody, right? Yeah. So I'm sitting up here in little Winnipeg, Canada, the belly button of North America, making this documentary film. I was commissioned by our local provincial broadcaster, MTS, to do this project. And that was kind of a kick for me, to receive funding from like a recognized broadcaster to make a film about the pagan community in my hometown. I pitched this concept, and the broadcaster was all over it, thought it was just great. It really was a facet of our local culture that hadn't been explored at all. So I was given some funding to make the film. And so I set about doing that. So, you think you're being really kind of anonymous and nobody's paying attention, but then one day this email pops into my inbox from a writer from The Wild Hunt, the pagan news journal. And her name was Heather Green. And she said, "Hey, I hear you're making a film about pagans up there in Winnipeg, Canada, and I'd like to write a story about this." And I'm looking at her email and I'm thinking, I can see in her sign off, she's down in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm thinking, how on earth does anybody in this, the Southern United States know anything that's happening up here in Canada? So that conversation led to an article about the making of the film, and then a second article that was a review when the film came out. And that led to a relationship with Heather. And when she took over editing The Wild Hunt, she dropped me another one of these, email surprises saying, "Hey, we want to expand the scope of the Wild Hunt. Would you consider being our Canadian correspondent?" And that was, so exciting to me. I really enjoy reading The Wild Hunt, and it's how I keep up to date on what the other pagans are doing. And so I wrote for them for 4 years, and that was great. I mean, it really gave me a chance to work on my writing chops. And because documentary film is such a passion for me, I really enjoy stories that are real. I really enjoy the sort of voyeuristic glimpses into other ways of living and other ways of being. I find it fascinating. So to write sort of on more in a journalistic way was a very, very exciting thing to do, because these are real stories, you know. And it dovetailed really nicely with what I was doing in my day job as in documentary film. So eventually Heather left and went to work at Llewellyn, and she had pitched a series of books about the elements of earth, air, fire, and water. And I guess all my rabble rousing and ranting about environmental issues and earthy types of magic must have stuck in her mind, because when she dropped me yet another one of those email bombs saying, "Hey, would you ever considered writing a book?" My first impulse there was to laugh and think she was joking. But she wasn't joking. And I figured that out when I was driving home from work that day and had to pull over and reread the email carefully and then respond that I would do it.
That would be an interesting way to come to it, to not have that kernel yourself, but to have someone kind of prod you into like, oh, by the way, here's this opportunity to do this. That's a different way to come at it, I guess, than having the spark for the book idea yourself.
Well, it's also a really good reminder, like if you see something in somebody that you think is precious, you need to tell that person that they have a talent or a skill that you think is precious. Because sometimes people are sitting, I feel in hindsight, I can say, looking back, I've been dying to do this. But, we all need to be validated, right? Mm-hmm. And when somebody says to you, you can do this, it's sometimes that little nudge is all you need to set off a really spectacular chain of events. And I try to remember that. That's the lesson I took out of that whole experience, is that you can't take for granted that somebody knows or has the confidence or that final little push to mm-hmm. get into doing something that's really going to be valuable, not only for them, but for their community or the world,
Well, and I think, being a creative person in general, like I'm sure you're already familiar with like, the doubts that creative people have. So to have someone outside validate that is always welcome. And especially if it's something it's new, like you're sticking your toe into, I think that's hugely important. I think that's a great point.
Yeah, no, agreed. And we all like to be recognized, for something that we do. I like to cook. And when somebody eats something that I've lovingly prepared for them and they say, "Oh, that was wonderful," like that makes me feel great. Mm-hmm. They feel happy, they feel taken care of, and they feel, nourished, literally and figuratively. But I get so much back from hearing that they are content.
Yeah, I'm a cook too, so I'm familiar with that feeling. Like the best thing about cooking is the sound they make when they eat it.
Yeah, agreed.
That's the validation.
Agreed.
Yeah. Great. So how did you approach the book? Like now that you have kind of this project and you're working on a series, like how did you approach the actual writing?
Well, because there were 4 of us that were writing the books. And, I didn't know the other women, I knew some of them very casually from attending pagan events and, conferences or what have you. But it's not like we were, able to, hang out together and meet and jam these ideas. So there was a bit of a template, like the types of chapters that would need to be in the book. So there was a lot of working with my editor to ensure that I was covering all the same sort of areas and topics that the other writers were covering. The upside of that is that the series is very coherent, and that, if you read one book, you're going to know and be able to trust that you're going to be able to get the same types of answers out of the other 3 books. Mm-hmm. The downside of that is that I had a whole bunch of material that I wanted to include in the book that didn't conform to the template that we'd all agreed to. And that's frustrating, because there were so many things that I wanted to include in the book that just didn't fit.
Mm-hmm.
So again, upside, there's another book there, and I'm really hoping that can come to light within the next couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
Earth magic, in all its various forms, is something that I'm very passionate about and something I care very deeply about. So it would be such a joy to see a second Earth magic book. I'd like to see the series, like a round 2 of the whole series, because there's so many facets of each of these elements, and the way that they interact with our lives, that I think we could expand it.
Mm-hmm.
But come what may, I'd like to do something again with Earth magic.
Yeah. I'm not surprised to find out there was more information that didn't make it into the book. Just the book itself is so dense with information, with correspondences. And I mean, I was just kind of blown away at like what's actually in what is relatively slim volume is packed full of information. Did you work with the people who did the essays, or was that just your editor? Did you choose the essays for those sections?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked about that, because I am so pleased with those essays. I handpicked everybody. Each of the writers chose who they were going to include and how they were going to include them. That was, up to each of us. And each of the books has that element in them. The folks I choose, now I'll tell you a secret. All but one of the folks I chose to contribute to my book are Canadians.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I'm up here in Canada. We have a very large country with a relatively low population. So we're pretty spread out from coast to coast. I've had the privilege of being able to travel around and meet lots of pagan folks. And quite selfishly, this was just like having a party and getting some of my friends to come along. People I've met along the way who I think are very, very interesting and articulate, and they all have very deep pagan practices that they're involved in that I find very inspiring. So, that's cool for me to be able to involve these folks in a project that I'm doing. All of them, the non-Canadian is Jackie Wood, who lives in Cornwall, UK. And I've been a fan of her writing for a number of years. She's written some books about based on her work as an experiential archaeologist. So, for example, she would take archaeological findings of, places where people would have been cooking and processing food, and using the evidence at hand, she has tried to recreate as best as she can possibly recreate recipes and dishes that people would have eaten in history, and cooking techniques and practices for domestic living. And I had the incredible thrill of visiting her at her home, which is on an old farm in rural Cornwall. And it's also an active archaeological site. And she also raises Bengal cats. So she had kittens, archaeology, cooking, and witchcraft all in one place. And my head exploded. It was way too much fun.
Yeah, I can't even imagine like how awesome that would be.
Kittens and archaeology. Can you believe it, right?
Kittens and archaeology about the witch pits, which that whole essay was so fascinating. And I was just, all the essays add so much, but I admit I was particularly taken with that one.
It's pretty intense, yeah. And I was able to explore the items she found in those witch pits, which are these. They look like a spell bottle, but they're not contained in a bottle. They're contained in a pit dug in the earth, and each pit is lined with some kind of animal hide, and then within that bundle is a series of artifacts. And of all the pits that she has discovered, they all follow a consistent pattern, but they're all slightly different, using different types of animal parts, different types of little artifacts, little tokens inside each pit. And they also span a rather long period of time from, 500 years ago up until the 70s, right? So it indicates that there's a form of traditional magic that isn't documented anywhere else, that has been practiced for hundreds of years within this same area. And I mean, I find that so exhilarating and so interesting. And knowing that the most recent pits that Jackie has found were dug and lain within my lifetime. This isn't ancient. Well, maybe I'm ancient, but this isn't ancient history. I was a child in the 70s, and people were, at some point in mid 70s, somebody did one of these pits. I was a little kid at the time. So that made me feel very close to my history as a witch. Very, very tantalizing. She had some folks from the Museum of Witchcraft at Boscastle come to talk to her and to look at this stuff. And they said to her, yeah, we don't know what this is. We have no documentation of this. It could be nothing. Well, it's not nothing. It's a lot of things, and it's very tangible. And isn't it exciting to think there's still, unknown witchcraft practices out there that aren't, on TikTok or Pinterest? This is great.
And like you said, in our life, I was a child in the 70s too. So I appreciate that overlap of something that is a continuance, not wholly a reconstruction, is fascinating.
Yes. Yeah. I love thinking about that. And I loved going there to see that. And then the rest of the essayists are Canadian folks. Dr. Karen Froman, who is an old friend of mine here in Winnipeg. She used to practice Wicca, and she let that go as when she went back to university and was working on her degree. She rediscovered her Indigenous spiritual practices and set aside European witchcraft to reclaim her heritage. And so that comes up in the essays. There's even a really lovely evocation to the goddess, the Kalia, or the goddesses, the Kalia, written by a poet and priestess, Angela Gray. So, a little bit of everything, some academia, some nerdy archaeological nerdiness, some poetry, and like you say, a lot of correspondences and some of my own reflections and whatnot sprinkled throughout the book too.
Yeah, it's an incredibly rich text. And someone mentioned this in one of the things, but at the beginning, but I also thought I loved that you gave permission for people to use it like a workbook, to really like live with this book and mark it up and take notes and, flag it, like all of those things. Cause I think, especially like books about practice, like that to me is how a book lives a little bit when you're using it in that way. And it's like when you have a cookbook that all the pages are dirty, that you go to time and time again. It just, to me, that is like the sign that what's in the book is important and has been useful.
It is a strange thing. Like I own a lot of books. It's like I'm one of those witches with all the stacks of books, towering and teetering around my office and my nightstand, and strategic piles that I think nobody's noticing throughout the house. But, I'm, obviously people listening can't see this, but I'm going to hold up. This is my own copy of Earth Magic that I'm holding up in my hands. And, I've got little Post-it notes sticking out, pages that are favorite pages that I've been asked about, pages that for some reason, just need to be noted in my own book. It took me a long time to get my head around the fact that my witch books are going to be mine, right? Someday, maybe somebody will inherit them, but they're inheriting something that was a working tool in my life. I used to freak out if I saw somebody writing in a book or highlighting in a book, with a highlighting pen. And then I changed my mind about that. I think I'm also a record collector. I'm just a giant nerd for vinyl. I worked in music stores for a really long time. And there's a record collector thing where the vinyl must be pristine. It must look unblemished. It must be as if it was never played, even though you've played it 100 times. No fingerprints, no cat hair. And I guess I kind of took that into books. And for record collectors, you don't want to devalue your collection by looking like you appreciated it, right? But with my witch books, I really feel like it's important that we use them as the tools that they should be. Like if you're reading the book and then using that book to do your craft, darn right it should be a little bit messed up. Okay, so maybe you don't want to get a pen and write something that, you might regret, but, some Post-it notes, maybe you're going to dog ear a page and bend it back so you don't, forget where you read that genius thing. Use your books. What are you afraid of?
Yeah, I think I came at it I collected cookbooks first. And like my most used cookbooks, like the spines were broken. And, my mom had a copy of like the Better Homes and Gardens cookbook from the 40s that was held together with duct tape. And so to me, it was like, that's a book that's like had a life and served a purpose.
Yes.
And I love to go into used bookstores and find other people's notes and comments in the margins of stuff. So I think it's just an interesting way. And I do think we tend to think of books as these very precious things. And they are, especially the information in them, but they are a tool, like you said, as well. So,
yeah, I thought it was important just to say, write in this book, make notes, throw it, get it muddy. It's, I don't know, it shows you're using it.
We all have checking it out in the world too.
Yeah. We all have books in our collections that we haven't read yet. Right. But isn't it great when you see evidence of a book well read?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Definitely. So you said like based on the series, you had like some parameters you had to hit for the things like that you were assigned to or things you wanted to include. Like how did you approach research for that? Because I know the bibliography in this book is pretty extensive. So how did you like come at the research portion of it?
How did I come at the research process? I don't know. A lot of what's everything that's in the book is things that are part of my life. So that's where I started. I didn't want to write about something that that I don't do or practice. And in some cases, I also wanted to fold in looking at sources that aren't necessarily pagan, right? For example, one of the books that I referred to, and one of the writers I referred to was Diana Beresford Kroger, who I actually worked with on a documentary film project, but she writes extensively about trees. And she's writing at it from the point of view of a scientist and a botanist. So, she's a pretty excellent primary source for me. So when it came to elements of the natural world, like trees or rocks or minerals or whatever, I tried to find primary sources, reference material that I really, really respect and recommend. And I'm fortunate in that because of my documentary film work, a lot of the projects I've been involved with are about natural history or environment. So I had some extra touchstones there. And then, trying to break that down and categorize it, and lots of Post-it notes, lots and lots and lots and lots of Post-it notes, millions. I think I own shares in the Post-it note company by now. yeah, how did I do that? I just kind of did it. I don't know if I had like a really I don't have a really well thought out method for that. Um, as I would research a certain topic, I would often have I'd have my manuscript document going and I'd be writing, but then I'd have a second document where I would put all my potential footnotes or sources just in a running document for each chapter, so that if I needed to double check something or cross check something, everything was kind of very nerdily color coded as well, so that I could keep track of, oh, the information about trees that I highlighted in green, that's all that I can go back to Diana's book for more information about that, or this field guide or whatever. So yeah, lots of color coding, lots of that kind of running commentary just to keep my thoughts organized. Because yeah, there was a lot of reference material used for that book.
I just was kind of impressed with how much, and it's funny you say like all this stuff is in your practice, because I was reading the section on salts and I was like, oh, this is a person who cooks, because so much of the references in the salt were, especially like the Himalayan black salt, is like, oh yeah, this shows up now in a lot of vegan cooking. And I was like, only someone who cooks would know that.
Well, and it's so funny because salt is something I collect. If I have so many kinds of salt in the house, and actually at my desk, I think right now I'm looking at like three. I'm looking around. I have at least 3 different types of salt in my office right now. It's such a fun thing to collect when you're if you go out traveling or whatever, and you go into some weird grocery store somewhere, and I see a type of salt I don't own, like that's my souvenir from my travels. And I find that different types of salt have different, they have a different texture, they have a different integrity, they have a different intensity. To taste it, you can, some are just saltier salts. Yeah. So I use it a lot in my magic and a lot in my cooking.
I travel to Slovenia a lot, and they have a salt works on their tiny coast. And I can't say it in Slovenian. I should be able to by now, but I can't. But the tagline for the salt company is "Salt to sea that could not return to the sky." And I've just always thought that was so beautiful. And I love that. I always buy salt for people as like my souvenir gift for them when I come back from Slovenia. So.
Yeah. I think one of the most hysterically funny things is when you buy fancy salt and it has an expiry date on it.
Yes.
I
guess they have to. I mean, I guess they have to. But yeah, I'm like, it's a rock. It's not going to go bad.
I just think it's funny.
So, I mean, we've covered a lot of this, but were there, because this book is so integrated into your practice, were there things in writing the book that actually changed your practice or surprised you when you were doing the writing or the research?
Oh, I was afraid you're going to ask me about this. Because the thing that comes to mind, if I'm being honest, is the conversation around rocks and crystals.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to lie, I own crystals, and they're really pretty and shiny, and my Taurus brain just loves beautiful objects and surrounding my environment with gorgeous things. But I have a real hard time with a lot of the mining practices and the extraction methods that are used to get these pretty things onto the shelves of, new agey shops or witchcraft shops. It really rubs me the wrong way. And, I really wrestled with that. And this also kind of folds in with your previous question about research. I really, well, obviously, if you're writing a book about earth magic, you're going to have to talk about rocks and crystals and minerals. So I sat with that. It was a chapter I just kept putting off and putting off and putting off. And it was literally, keeping me up at night. Like, how am I going to approach this without being a jerk about them? I like them. It's like there's so many ethics involved. And so I have a friend who runs a store, and her store it's sort of a groovy bohemian jewelry making supply shop. So she has a lot of beads and little, charms and things you can buy to make your own jewelry. And she also sells some pretty beautiful import goods from around the world. And she also has a really large offering of crystals that you can go and buy. And, her shop provides her with the means to support her family and to take her family on amazing buying trips, to go to these locations to buy rocks, basically, and, goods for her store. And so over a few weeks, we met and had coffee in the park. This was, beautiful during a beautiful summer. And I just picked her brain pretty hard about what it's like to be a crystal buyer who goes to such lengths to acquire, things for her store. Because she literally will get on a plane and go to some far-flung place to meet with the people who mine these and to buy stuff. And, the harsh reality is, like, yeah, a lot of these businesses are run by families, and child labor is used. And, she compared it to family farming, where the kids are mucking out, the animals and feeding the animals and getting up really early. She compared it to that. I mean, the stakes maybe aren't quite so high, but, crystal mining can be a much more dangerous thing than farming in a lot of ways. But it also, in a lot of the places where these practices are enacted, there's not a lot of other options for people to earn a living. People that are living in poverty, and if they can make some money harvesting these rocks for Westerners who want to pay a lot of money for them and put them on a shelf, well, so be it. So I can't say I'm at peace with it, because I'm still upset that a lot of these things have to happen. It's one of those things where there's no easy answer for the politics and ethics behind that, but I understand it a lot more now. And I also know that just about every shop I've ever gone into and asked them where their rocks come from, they all say, oh, we deal direct with the miners. Well, yeah, everybody says that, and everybody says that because the people that they buy them from say that. It's a line that is used in that industry. It's one of those things where, I had to sit with it for a really long time. Do I use rocks more in my practice? I would say I use my local rocks more. I think that if you want to find the right stone to do magic, look down. What are you standing on? That's probably a better place to start than the New Age shop. If you want to do magic that works with water, go to a local body of water and find a rock. If you want to find a rock that corresponds really well with the element of fire, look around your local environment, see what speaks to you. Do that first. I'm probably more on top of that than I used to be. I think all witches like to collect rocks in some capacity. Maybe not relying on a crystal store to supply you with your needs would be a better option. But if you have to go to the crystal store, bear in mind what you're doing and how you're participating in that machine, and just be aware of it.
Yeah, I thought that was a powerful section, and I liked the many suggestions you give about, like, if, like you just now, like different ways, like if you set up a swap with your friends, your witches, to redistribute the stuff that you already have rather than go buy new things. I think it was really a good suggestion. And that section, I mean, I didn't know you struggled with it, but I liked how thoughtful it was in the book about this aspect of earth magic of practice. So it
Well,
shows. It shows in the work that you really thought about it, I think.
yeah, I agonized about it. And it's funny too. I was visiting some friends in Ontario, and we stopped in at a flea market. It was a big flea market. And I said, well, I'm going to look around, see if I can find any crystals here, secondhand. And my two friends who were with me were like, oh, I'd never think to look for crystals here. Wouldn't you know, we found two huge display cases. It looked like some collector must have sold off an entire collection of beautiful samples. And the three of us just stood there staring at how beautiful they all were. And it's like, these are secondhand at least.
Mm-hmm.
The prices were great. And, looking in unconventional places for these things is, just keep your eyes open. Mm-hmm. They'll show up.
Yeah. I mean, if it's already out in the world, like as a secondhand thing. I mean, I think about that a lot with sustainability in general. If you're buying something secondhand, you're not contributing to new production the same way. So yeah, that makes sense. So I think this leads really well into my next question about like, what do you hope your readers take away from the book, especially Earth Magic, and how did you see your relationship or your responsibility to your readers in writing it?
Well, I hope people take away that, oh gosh, I hope people take away the fact that it doesn't have to be complicated to be authentic. You can connect to the element of earth by doing things that you would do anyway, right? But doing them with the awareness and mindfulness, and the use of sort of a magical filter, right? There's a chapter about witching in the kitchen, cooking for the Sabbats and recipes that can be symbolic of that Sabbat. You would probably cook dinner anyway, or prepare food for a Sabbat anyway, but to do so with, the season in mind and the types of ingredients in mind, and with magical intent. There's in the introduction to the book, I talk about the overview effect, which is when it's something that's reported by astronauts when they go off into outer space, and then they look down and they can see Earth in its entirety and how precious and fragile it is, just kind of floating out there in space. And people who have that opportunity to see that come back to Earth kind of changed, right? And I would hope that somebody who reads the book would reflect a little bit on what that might be like, and how we can work with this planet in a constructive way with our magic and our daily activities, in a way that we can kind of keep that whole vision sort of somewhere in our mind, that the things that we do, the legacies that we leave, the imprint that we make, it's not just about the immediate here and now. There's a bigger picture, that we can all, if we all did a little bit of that, we could change the whole thing, right? Totally hippy dippy idealism coming from me right now, but I really hope that people take away a vision of the planet as a living thing, a living organism that we are a part of, and that the natural energy and currents of the earth are things that we can be attuned to, and we can use to enhance our magic and our mundane lives too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that we're a part of is so important. Like, I think we've, especially in Western culture, we have this idea that somehow we're separate from nature and not of nature and part of nature. And I like that discussion is happening. And I think you point to that really beautiful in the book too, that we're not separate. Like, what we do impacts it, and we are impacted constantly. So,
yeah. I think so. I believe we are. And, nature has almost been, I don't know, it's almost like some kind of strange fetish for people. It's othered, but we're part of it. And we need to reintegrate ourselves into the patterns of the natural world and not be so apart from it. The bewilderment people experience when you and I see it, if you find somebody, if you have a friend who never goes out to the park or never stands outside in the rain, and you take them to have these experiences, it can be quite shocking to watch somebody who's confused by very natural things. And I'm always surprised when I find pagans who are surprised by nature, and nature in all of its forms, in its beauty and in its scariness. There's some pretty terrifying elements of nature, but being able to sort of breathe through that and accept that it's the way it's supposed to be. It's okay. Holding back or hiding from it isn't healthy.
Agreed. Thank you. I think you summed it up really well there. Why, and I think also why this book is be great for people to read, and the rest of the series, how connected they are, and hopefully there is a book 2.
I hope so.
So what is on the horizon for you? Are there projects coming up that might look like book 2 for Earth Magic, or what else is going on?
Well, right now I'm working on a book about the relationships between magical practitioners and animals. And I'm hoping to get that manuscript delivered in the new year as quickly as possible. And then I'm going to start pushing for something else about Earth Magic. I've got a few logs in the fire. We'll see what catches, but yeah, definitely the Witches and Familiars Magical Companions book will be out probably, if I deliver it in the new year, probably early 2023. Mm-hmm. That's my guess. And yeah, working on documentary film projects, developing projects there as well. So. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All those, I hope they catch, but maybe not all at the same time.
No, that would be a disaster. We need these nicely spaced and at a comfortable pace,
exactly.
right?
Exactly. So I mentioned at the top that you have a website. Is there other places where readers can connect with you pretty easily, or?
Yeah, my website's a good place. You can find me Dodie GM on Instagram. There's Dodie Graham McKay Books and Films on Facebook. I don't do Twitter. Social media is weird. I'd rather go outside and play than sit and stare at a device. So yeah, Insta is a good way to find me.
Great. I will put all the links to that in the show notes for people to get to it pretty easily. So you know this because I sent you a warning at the top. But so our last question is, you mentioned your Taurus nature. I'm a double Scorpio, so I love to talk about things we're not supposed to talk about. Which I guess is one of the reasons I wanted to do a podcast. So I'm going to roll a die, and depending on what number rolls, I have a question for you that's either related to your book or writing in general. That's about death, sex, religion, politics, or money. And if I roll a 6, you get to pick which you want the question to come from.
Oh dear. Okay.
All right. Are you ready? 4. So politics, which we kind of already covered a little bit. So you talk about protectors, and you have an article, essay from a earth protector, water protector in the book. So what do you see as the witch's role in climate change, and what duty do witches have?
Witches must protect the earth. We don't have the luxury of being ambivalent about this. Climate change is real. I live in the middle of the Canadian prairies. We had a scorching hot summer, and going outside was a challenge at times because the smoke that was in the air from forest fires that were hundreds of miles away was just blanketing the city, and everybody looked stoned. We all had, bloodshot eyes this summer from the smoke in the air. If that's not a wake-up call, if that doesn't demand people's attention, then I don't know what. British Columbia on the west coast of Canada right now is incurring terrible flooding. People are dying. Okay. Wildlife is being decimated. Farm animals are drowning by the tens of thousands, and people still won't wake up. Witches who want to think that they are being super cool and like, working with the spirits of nature and doing all this groovy natural stuff, but not actually doing that in real life, need to do better. We just all of us need to do better. If you want to connect with the deities or the genius Loki or the spirits of the land that you live on, and get favors and boons from those entities, then do something to protect the land, people. It's a no-brainer, on a very, very, simplistic level. If you're asking the spirits of this land to do something for you, yet you stand by while it's being raped and pillaged, you don't deserve to have your magic met. It's a reciprocal relationship we need to have with our environment, period. You have to do something real if you want something real to happen.
Oh, I agree 100%.
Was that ranty enough?
Oh, it was perfect. I will gild your soapbox for you.
I was hoping we'd get sex when you rolled the dice, but
I know, like I haven't hit that with anybody yet. I'm really disappointed. I have to change.
But you're a Scorpio. You can do this.
I know. I'm gonna have to like really ponder that the next time. I mean, sometimes the question kind of leads into that anyway, but yeah, no, thank you so much. And like, don't feel like that's a rant. I have to like preach it from the mountaintops. It's important.
I was hoping we'd get maybe I'll be on the show again sometime. And
yes,
I'll send you a special dice that's all just sixes or whatever we
there you
need.
go. That sounds good. No, I would love to have you back, especially when the book about familiars comes out.
Yeah, let's do
it. Person who lives with a cat. I'm looking forward to this book a lot. So. Well, great. Thank you, Dodie, so much for being on, and let's keep in touch.
Yes, let's do that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. WitchLit is a production of Thousand Volt Press and is edited by Keifel A. Agostini, who also designed our logo. You can find us online at witchlitpod.com and on Instagram and Twitter at witchlitpod. Thanks for listening and for reading witchy.